The fading days of World War II, when Japan's empire was collapsing and the once proud soldiers of the rising sun found themselves prisoners in foreign lands, a quiet but remarkable cultural encounter unfolded across the Pacific. Among the thousands of Japanese prisoners of war held in the United States were a few hundred women, nurses, clerks, and civilian auxiliaries, captured in the chaos of island campaigns or intercepted while trying to flee collapsing bases in the Pacific. These women, raised under the stern codes of Imperial Japan, where honor, obedience, and sacrifice were the pillars of their existence, found themselves in a nation whose customs, language, and way of life were unlike anything they had ever imagined. When autumn arrived and the leaves turned crimson and gold, something extraordinary took place within those guarded camps and nearby American towns, the celebration of Halloween. What for Americans was a festive night of laughter, costumes, and candy became, for these Japanese women, a window into another world, one so shockingly different from the militarized, duty-bound life they had always known that it seemed almost unreal. The first signs of the holiday arrived quietly. Pumpkins appeared on mess hall tables and windowsills of nearby American houses, carved into grinning faces that flickered with candles after dusk. The POW women, often tasked with sewing, cleaning, or assisting in kitchens, stared at these strange orange lanterns with confusion and fascination. They whispered among themselves in hushed Japanese, unsure of what they represented, perhaps a symbol of defiance, or some foreign ritual honoring the dead. For these women, raised with the Shinto reverence for ancestors and the solemnity of Obon, the idea that death could be treated with humor and playfulness seemed not only alien but almost sacrilegious. Yet, they couldn't look away. Children dressed as ghosts and witches ran through the camp's outskirts, laughing freely as American guards smiled, passing them candy and joking in ways that seemed too casual for soldiers at war. The Japanese women, still in their drab uniforms or hand-me-down clothes, stood behind fences watching this strange display of freedom and innocence, and for the first time, they began to sense that America was not the monstrous enemy their homeland's propaganda had described, it was something else entirely. Inside the camp, some of the guards and Red Cross workers decided to share the spirit of the holiday with the prisoners. They organized small festivities, nothing extravagant, just harmless amusement meant to lift morale. Pumpkins were brought in, paper decorations hung in makeshift halls, and even a few costumes were made from scraps of cloth and old uniforms. One American nurse taught a few of the Japanese women how to carve faces into pumpkins, guiding their trembling hands with gentle patience. The women laughed nervously as they made their first jack-o'-lanterns, startled when the candlelight inside made their creations glow with a ghostly grin. It was a strange feeling, half fear, half wonder, as if they were participating in some secret act that transcended the war itself. For the first time since their capture, they felt a flicker of warmth that wasn't from the sun or a fire, but from human kindness. The guards, once seen as the faces of the enemy, suddenly appeared human, some even kind. The sharp line between us and them blurred for just one night beneath the glow of pumpkins and laughter echoing through the chilly October air. To the Japanese women, Halloween became more than a night of strange masks and treats, it became a mirror reflecting two worlds. They saw how Americans treated even their darkest themes, death, fear, ghosts, with playfulness and imagination rather than dread. It stood in sharp contrast to their homeland, where death was wrapped in silence, where soldiers were taught to die for honor and mothers were told to celebrate their son's sacrifice. Here, death was not sacred nor feared, it was mocked and turned into art, into laughter, into something that belonged to the living. As the night deepened and the festivities waned, the women returned to their barracks in silence, carrying with them an unfamiliar feeling. It was not joy exactly, but a sense of awakening, a quiet realization that life could be lived differently. In the months that followed, many of these women would write in secret journals about that night, about the flickering pumpkins, the smiling guards, and the American children who laughed without fear. It was, for them, the moment when the war truly ended, not on the battlefield, but in the heart, illuminated by the soft, trembling light of a jack-o'-lantern. In the weeks that followed that strange night of flickering lights and laughter, something began to shift quietly inside the camp. The Japanese women who had once moved like silent shadows, obedient, cautious, and resigned to captivity, now carried a different kind of energy. Halloween had done something subtle but profound. It had cracked open the emotional wall that separated them from the world beyond the barbed wire. For the first time, they had witnessed Americans not as soldiers or conquerors, but as ordinary people, fathers, mothers, and children capable of play, creativity, and warmth. To the Japanese female POWs, whose entire understanding of the West had been shaped by imperial propaganda that painted America as savage and immoral, this discovery was nothing short of transformative. Each morning after that night, when they swept the camp's pathways or assisted the nurses in the infirmary, they found themselves glancing toward the guards with a new sense of curiosity rather than suspicion. Some even dared to smile back when greeted, a small act of rebellion against everything they had been taught to believe. Among them was a young woman named Aiko, a former nurse captured on Saipan. She had watched Halloween unfold from behind a fence, her hands gripping the cold wire as American children in masks ran past. She had seen them pretend to be ghosts and monsters, laughing as though war did not exist. For Aiko, who had seen death too many times in the bloodied tents of the Pacific, that laughter had pierced her heart like a knife. Yet she could not stop thinking about it. She began to ask questions, quietly, to a Red Cross worker who spoke a little Japanese, about the meaning of Halloween. When she learned that it was a holiday where people dressed as spirits and played games to celebrate the turning of seasons, she was stunned. How could people who had lost so many sons in battle still find it in themselves to celebrate, to dress in costumes, to hand out sweets to children? That question haunted her, though she did not voice it aloud. It became a seed that would grow in her mind, a seed of doubt about everything she had been told about duty, sacrifice, and the supposed purity of dying for the emperor. Inside the camp, that quiet cultural exchange began to deepen. The American guards, many of them young men from small towns, found themselves intrigued by the Japanese women's reactions. They had expected defiance or resentment, but instead they saw curiosity, even gentleness. On Sundays, when work was light, a few guards brought books, magazines, and sometimes photographs from home to show the women. There were pictures of Halloween parties, neighborhood parades, and families carving pumpkins together. To the POWs, these images were like scenes from another universe, a place where people could be free, where life was not dictated by the state or military codes, but by simple human joy. One American nurse later recalled how one of the Japanese women had pointed at a picture of children in costume and asked in halting English, "They not afraid of ghost?" When the nurse laughed and said, "No, it's just for fun," the woman stared for a long time, her eyes wet with something that was not quite sadness and not quite relief. It was as if she had just realized that fear could be optional, that it did not have to rule one's life. The transformation that began with Halloween continued to ripple through the camp in quiet ways. The women began to decorate their quarters with small handmade crafts, folding paper lanterns or sketching autumn leaves they saw through the fence. They began to speak more softly, not out of fear, but with a kind of newfound peace. They were still prisoners, yes, but within those walls, the idea of freedom had begun to take root, not as something political or physical, but as something internal. The guards noticed it too. The atmosphere in the camp grew lighter, more human. One American sergeant later wrote in his diary that after Halloween, it felt less like a prison and more like a school where everyone was learning about each other. It was a fragile peace, born not of treaties or surrenders, but of empathy. In that small corner of a war-torn world, the spirit of Halloween, the strange, mischievous, joyous dance with darkness, had done what years of propaganda could not. It had reminded two enemies of their shared humanity. As winter descended and the war's echoes grew faint, the Japanese female prisoners began to see the world around them with new eyes. The snows that blanketed the camp seemed gentler somehow, less like a reminder of isolation and more like a veil of calm laid across a wounded world. The memory of that Halloween night, of glowing pumpkins, laughter, and the rustle of paper masks, remained vivid in their minds. It had become a kind of emotional turning point, a moment that quietly redefined their understanding of humanity. For so long, they had believed that war divided the world into absolutes, loyalty or betrayal, life or death, victory or shame. But now, they saw something deeper, how ordinary people could hold sorrow and joy in the same breath, how even in a country that had destroyed their cities, there existed a heartbeat of kindness that could not be extinguished by bombs or propaganda. In the quiet corners of their barracks, they began to talk, not about the war or home, but about what life might look like after captivity, after the emperor's voice had fallen silent, after the world turned its page. It was during this time that small acts of friendship began to bloom between the Japanese women and the American personnel. A few of the POWs were given permission to assist in nearby farms or hospitals under supervision. There, they saw firsthand the rhythm of American life, the laughter of children walking to school, the smell of bread from local bakeries, the warmth of people greeting each other freely in the streets. These were scenes that felt almost unreal to women raised in a society where duty came before self, where laughter in times of crisis was considered a kind of weakness. Aiko, the young nurse, was among those who worked in a local hospital under guard. She watched as American nurses tended to wounded soldiers, not with pride or ceremony, but with tenderness. She noticed how they comforted the injured with jokes, how they sometimes hummed songs as they worked. She began to imitate them, carefully learning small English phrases, smiling at patients, folding towels with quiet care. In her journal, later found years after the war, she wrote, "They do not fear ghosts or death. They walk beside them and smile." Maybe that is strength, too. For the Americans, these Japanese women were a mystery that defied everything they had been taught as well. They had expected bitterness, maybe even hatred, but instead found grace, humility, and an almost poetic curiosity about the world around them. The cultural exchange deepened through gestures rather than words, sharing a cup of coffee, teaching origami, showing how to sew patches on uniforms. On one cold December evening, a local church choir visited the camp and sang Christmas carols through the wire fence. The Japanese women listened silently, their breath misting in the cold air. They didn't understand the words, but the music, soft, haunting, and full of peace, brought tears to many eyes. For Aiko and her companions, it was the second time they had witnessed an American ritual that celebrated life rather than victory. Halloween had shown them that even darkness could be playful, Christmas revealed that even loss could be wrapped in light. These moments became emotional anchors in a sea of uncertainty, proof that life could continue even after destruction. The guards noticed something remarkable as spring approached. The discipline in the camp improved, not through punishment or order, but through quiet cooperation. The women worked willingly, smiled more often, and seemed genuinely invested in keeping peace among themselves. They wrote letters home that the censors found surprisingly gentle, not bitter, not defiant, but reflective. One letter from a former nurse read, "America is not what we were told. It is not an enemy of the spirit. It is a place that fears less and laughs more." I think we could learn something from that. For many Americans reading those words, it was a shock, a realization that compassion could bridge even the wounds of war. By the time these women were repatriated to Japan, they carried with them not just the memory of captivity, but the haunting beauty of that first Halloween. In the ashes of Tokyo and Nagasaki, when people asked them what America was truly like, they spoke not of guns or prisons, but of lanterns carved from pumpkins, of laughter echoing through the night, and of a lesson that transcended nations, that even in the shadow of death, life has a way of shining through. Years later, when the war had long ended and Japan was slowly rebuilding from ashes, the memory of that distant American Halloween still lived in the hearts of the women who had once been prisoners. For them, it had not been a night of mere curiosity, it had become a symbol of awakening, a turning point in their understanding of what humanity could be. Many of these former POWs returned home to find a country transformed, cities reduced to rubble, families scattered, the imperial order dismantled. Yet, amid the ruins, they carried something fragile but powerful within them, a seed of empathy sown in captivity. For Aiko and others like her, the image of glowing pumpkins and the laughter of American children lingered not as a dream but as a lesson. It taught them that fear could be unlearned, that strength did not always roar, and that compassion could survive even the cruelest wars. In a society struggling to redefine itself, these women became quiet messengers of peace, their memories bridging two worlds that had once sworn to destroy each other. In post-war Japan, the stories of those who had seen America up close were often met with disbelief. The official narratives of defeat focused on loss and humiliation, not on the humanity of the former enemy. But Aiko, like many others, began to share fragments of her experiences in letters, diaries, and whispered conversations. When she spoke of Halloween, the night she first saw Americans laughing at ghosts, listeners would stare in wonder. Some thought she exaggerated, that no people could take death so lightly. But others listened and felt something stir within them, especially the younger generation growing up under occupation. These were children who had never known the empire, who now watched American soldiers hand out candy on the streets of Tokyo during October, and who saw the strange carved pumpkins appearing in shop windows. The festival that had once startled Japanese prisoners began, quietly, to take root in the very country that had once considered such displays immoral. Aiko saw it happen, how schoolchildren began dressing in costumes, how laughter returned to a land once silenced by war, and each year, when she saw the first pumpkin appear, she smiled, remembering that long-ago night behind the wire. Over time, historians began to uncover the hidden stories of these women, piecing together journals, Red Cross reports, and letters home. They found records of kindness between captors and captives that defied wartime expectations, American guards who taught their prisoners English, Japanese nurses who helped deliver American babies in military hospitals, and women who continued to send gifts across the Pacific long after the war was over. When one historian interviewed an aging Aiko in the 1980s, she spoke softly, her voice trembling with age and memory. "We were enemies," she said, "but that night, I saw something greater than war. I saw people dressing as ghosts not to scare each other, but to laugh together. That was when I understood that peace is not made by governments, it is made by small things, like laughter." Her words, recorded and later published, became a quiet testament to the idea that even the darkest history can give birth to moments of light. In the years that followed, Halloween in Japan grew into a phenomenon of its own, bright parades, elaborate costumes, and streets filled with joy. Few who celebrated it knew the strange, tender connection it had to a group of women who once watched the holiday from behind fences, their hearts filled with confusion and awe. But for those who did, it remained a symbol of reconciliation, proof that cultures once divided by violence could find common ground in something as simple as shared wonder. The female Japanese POWs who had been shocked to see Halloween in America became, in a way, the first ambassadors of understanding between two worlds. Their memories stood as living proof that kindness, once shown, never truly dies, it only travels, glowing softly through generations, like the light inside a jack-o'-lantern on a dark and quiet night.